Chris, thank you so much. Of
No,
course.
pleasure. Thank you.
I hope it is a pleasure.
Yeah, you're right. Let's see. Let's see how it goes.
Let's see how it goes. Despicable Me 4. Who'd have thought, huh? Who'd
Yes.
have thought?
Not me. Certainly 15, 16 years ago.
Wow, is it really that long? Yeah.
Well, it
2000
came out
yeah.
14 years ago, but I started working on it 16 years ago.
Oh, my
the
gosh.
first Despicable Me. Yeah.
My first experience with Despicable Me was in America. I was living in Philadelphia at the time, and I remember hearing about this film and just going, oh, that's interesting, you know. I was not so clued into the animation world as I
Right.
am now.
Right.
And I went to see it, and it was just uproariously good. Not just funny, but obviously has heart.
Right.
And it became this strange cultural institution. Right?
Yes, absolutely. That's a good way to put it.
Yeah, I want to talk a little bit about that first before we get into the fourth one, if that's
Sure,
okay.
sure.
So, the Minions.
Yes.
Right. You voice some of them still, don't you?
Some little efforts are me in this one, not much. But I did it with Pierre on the first film and the second film. And I have not really voiced the Minions since Minions, the first Minions. Most of it, even in the first two movies, is Pierre. And what would happen, the way I would even be in the movie as a Minion, is I would be working an editorial with the story, and like something like the Minion singing the lullaby or the Minion doing the be-do with the alarm, and we needed something in there, and I would just put it in. But now it's really Pierre, and the language, the vocabulary comes from him, and basically, you're sort of doing it as a director, and of course, I didn't direct the first Minion film. Pierre did that with Kyle Balda, so that kind of like the way we were doing it, like just throw something in, and then that sort of becomes, the voice that we would use, because I wasn't in that day to day, so I haven't voiced a Minion in quite a while.
Quite a while,
yeah.
But it's interesting because they're so like, I don't think anyone could have predicted how far they've traveled in cultural, like pop culture.
Yes.
They're probably within the last decade anyways, the kind of animation thing that's existed in, like, before there was things like Shrek and stuff, but it's really become the Minions.
But I think they're even different than Shrek or even great characters in Toy Story. They operate on a different level.
Yes,
Which, I worked on the Ice Age films and worked a lot with the character of the Scrat. And for me, the way the Scrat kind of stood out and was his own thing was definitely in my thinking as we started creating the Minions. But the truth is the Minions have far and away eclipsed the Scrat. So I think their cultural impact, comes from a few different things. One is, of course, the language. Somebody was just in here commenting on Dua Lipa, prosciutto. There's always like these words that come through, and that was part of the plan from the beginning. Was like little words, kind of poking through that we could understand, but also are talking about it. Pierre and I, we talked about the Jawas and R2-D2. And R2-D2 specifically, like, you get emotion and meaning out of almost nothing. And so there's a universality, though, to that. You're like, I know what they're saying. I can feel what they're saying, even if I don't understand it. So again, with that, you can put it on any culture across the globe. Then there's the simplicity of the design. Anybody can draw a Minion, a kid, an adult. There's a simplicity, but also a sophistication with the goggle and the nice the surfacing on the denim, and then there's just their behavior, the way they're animated. They're, and their original conception of them was incompetent children who love Gru as a way to give Gru appeal, and so those elements all together, have just kind of created this thing that people across the globe, anybody, can take ownership of, and whether they're making a meme or whatever, and I think it's got these very unique properties that it's one of those things, man. It's like lightning in a bottle. Like, I'm saying it now, like, oh, this is what it was, and I think in our heads, we thought, oh yeah, we were hopeful that they would be comedic breakout characters like the Scrat, where you could put the camera on them and like, okay, we can use, get a comedic break here. but the amount to which people have embraced them, I think is just not something you could predict back in 2010.
2010, no, definitely not. But it's interesting as well because Despicable Me is loaded with very interesting and complex but lovable characters, I think, because you think in something like that, you hope they're comedic breakouts. But then you've got the three girls as well, who are by themselves, by far away, also incredible characters. You've centered around Gru, who's also a very rich character, and everyone you keep adding to it is this kind of rich sense that you're going through. And it's kind of an embarrassment of riches, I think.
It is a little bit. But I think you're identifying something that, and even other things I've worked on, have struggled with. There is something about the characters in this world beyond the Minions that really, really resonate. And I think people really love that. Gru is kind of the anchor. And I think that obviously voiced by Steve Carell, but also the look of him, this kind of European thing. One thing I love about our movies are the look of the human characters, which have this real graphic, almost 2D sensibility that feels to this day distinct, because there are other things out there that look very similar, and I always think that the characters in the Despicable Me world kind of just had this something you can grab onto graphically, and like Agnes is a perfect example of a character that is a little kid, innocent, but it's got this kind of even in the new one, her relationship with her goat Lucky, there's something a little off about it. That's fun, just trying to find those little bits of contrast, little bits of distinction that make the characters stand out.
Yeah, and you're doing that. And again, every single time, I think what I've been circling around to with all this is there's an incredible sense of play in the truest sense of that word when it comes to these films that is very attractive, right? And you could say it centers around the Minions, how they interact and their characteristics, but it kind of permeates the whole way through. It seems very playful. And I think that's an essential ingredient for true storytelling. And you guys definitely have that.
Part of that radiated out of, certainly both Pierre and I in the first film, loved Looney Tunes and Bugs Bunny and that. But it was also thinking about, so we had an affinity for that kind of fun, which I think is partly what you're alluding to. It was also looking for a way to be distinct to what else was out there. I mean, there were other studios doing what they do wonderfully. And it felt a little bit like a fool's errand to try to do what they're doing. And like, how do we create something distinct? And I think we've been fortunate in that the audience, to date anyway, has really embraced that sensibility. And they really take it for how we intend it. Yeah. Not everybody does, but the audience does. And that's been very gratifying to witness.
Yeah, because it seems like every time Minions or Despicable Me comes out, it just kind of erupts back through society. Like, it has these ripples.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
Yeah. I mean, like with the last film, Minions: Rise of Gru, that online fever, it was like something you couldn't have predicted. But what's interesting about it, and I had an opportunity to kind of think about it a little bit, is that for some people much younger than me, it's theirs. It's not like Marvel. That's from the '60s. Those characters, Star Wars from the '70s. The Minions and Despicable Me, that came up in 2010. So for kids, it's like, no, this is mine. And so those young guys who are dressing in suits, they felt ownership of something that came about in their generation. And so that's kind of an interesting phenomenon to see, because certainly as a kid, I loved Marvel, and of course I've enjoyed the films, but the characters I was familiar with since I was born, and Star Wars not long after. So and those things are still going, but again, they're really from a generation back. Where this is new, and to see people embracing it as their own is kind of interesting.
It is interesting. And now we're up to Despicable Me 4.
4. Yes.
Which is like do you, when you're developing these, think, how can we challenge Gru this time, right?
100%.
Yeah.
I mean, like, The great thing about the world, though, and the characters is that of anything, and sequels are very difficult, but it is a sequelizable world compared to a lot of things because they're human. They live in a world kind of like ours, so you can look for areas that are very relatable for comedy. Whereas if you're dealing with animals or mystical creatures, it can be a little tricky because you're sort of putting something on it versus them just living. Because for years, animation kind of avoided humans because they didn't look so good. But then, certainly, obviously, with The Incredibles, that kind of like was the first door open of like, okay, maybe this will work. And so that's what's great about this world with Gru and his family. And so I've always thought of these films as basically the theme is career versus family, which we can all relate to. And so you think about like what's the family problem or dynamic and who is the new villain that Gru's going to be up against. Yes. And so if you can kind of come up with an interesting answer to both of those questions, then hopefully you've got what you need to build a new story.
Yeah. But let's talk then about Despicable Me 4 because you've got something that seems like an almost indestructible villain.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is largely, I wouldn't say driving, it's kind of like the ticking clock, he kind of is, right?
So, it was so we wanted the villain to be, there's a few aspects to him. So he's an old high school rival of Gru's. So that's kind of fun, particularly with the actor Will Ferrell playing him, with him and Carell. You can kind of, that undercurrent of a rivalry is a lot of fun to play between those two guys. And he had to be dangerous enough in the opening scene to help the story motivate Gru and the family to leave their home. So that was where. But the funny thing is, what I like about the cockroach idea is that it's sort of a bad idea because it's so unappealing. It's like, why would you do that? You could have been a Spider-Man or an Ant-Man, right? So it's sort of the bad idea-ness of it, which is sort of a hallmark of the Despicable Me villains. They're never quite right. Was appealing, and so. Yeah, he's got these different aspects, but then because there was this new element in the story, which was Gru Jr., the baby, with these villains, like what their motivation is, how do you drive them through the story is always a little tricky. But having him focus very early on the baby, and in animation, we were playing the baby very naturalistically for the most part. So you feel the vulnerability, and then as you say, a ticking clock. You feel like, ooh, that's going to be dangerous for that little baby, and you can feel Gru, his hopefully you could feel his like desperation when we get to the third act.
Yeah, having the baby in there obviously does open up a deep vulnerability that you kind of like. The girls were always that, right? And that is an additional layer that kind of exists within this world.
And from a storytelling point of view. One of the things we wanted to try to do differently, I guess it ends up being the same in some ways, was that it wasn't the girls in jeopardy because we'd done that so many times.
Yeah.
So, I had somebody ask the question, and I think there's certainly an element of this because there's so many new characters and new ideas in DM4. How do you serve everything, particularly the girls? And in some ways, with these sequels, you have to kind of serve everything that people love, but you do really have to deliver something new. Because I think if we'd gone to the well of like, oh, the girls are in jeopardy again, it just is like, oh man, that's the fourth time. So even though it's a baby, it's a slight, it's similar. It does have a different feel. And I think that's important to keep the audience engaged.
Yeah, because it's very hard to service everyone. People love Agnes, by the way.
Yeah. And she does have she is with her relationship with the goat, her unwillingness to lie about her new identity. But you're right. I mean, like these things, and you have to make decisions. You have to make choices. You can't, you experiment and we try storylines for everyone more expansive, and then whether. So there's multiple characters, not just Agnes, that you have to find what's the right amount given all the things going on in the movie. Yeah.
Talk to me a little bit about then, because we're in character world, Poppy and Chitty Chitty Bang Bang.
So the car, it's funny because, and I don't know how you felt. So the car was the principal of the schools, her car. Because I had somebody ask me, where did that car come from? They thought that Poppy had invented it. I was like, no, that's the car they took.
Yeah.
I know it says reserved for Principal Uberschleck, so that was her principal parking spot. And that was 100% the influence for that car was Chitty Chitty Bang Bang. And clearly, if you know the film, you'll know what I'm talking about. And what we wanted there was, we always try for this, is contrast, because just speaking about the design is like this very sleek tank looking cockroach-shaped tank that Maxine flies that looks very dangerous and foreboding. And then this kind of delicate old lady car, basically that has no chance against this thing. And so and there's no roof, so you feel Gru and Poppy's vulnerability against this thing that seems impossible to break into. And then Poppy as a character, again, it's all about contrast, is I think a lot of fun, particularly as voiced by Joey King. But her look, she's in this kind of prim tennis outfit, a lot of red hair. But she's got the power over Gru because she knows who he is and threatens to expose him. Again, putting Gru and his family in danger from Maxime, who's in hot pursuit. So it's a fun dynamic. This little 13-year-old kid who knows who Gru is and has power over him, and then uses that power to blackmail him to help her commit a heist that's going to hopefully help her get in her put on her application to get into this school she wants to go to. So anyway, it's creating kind of a fun dynamic. And what I like about Poppy is she's very ominous when we first meet her. But then there's this kind of kid thing that comes out of her when they're on the heist, and it's almost a giddiness. She's so excited to be here with one of her heroes, sort of performing a crime that she's probably been dreaming of for years. So anyway, it's just finding that, and of course the guy's in animation, located, just great performance. That really gives her a lot of fun, including her, when we first see her training with her video game, Dance Revolution or whatever it is. It's a lot of fun.
It was very authentic to what I see happening as well, which is just one foot going.
Yeah.
It's so funny you talk about choices because you set up these things, right, that I think are going to go one way.
Yeah.
They don't quite swing that way.
Yeah.
Like Poppy and Margot. I'm just like, are we going to spend time in high school? Are we going to see Margot kind of not fitting in, that kind of stuff? And is Poppy going to be the bully? Not at all.
Interesting you say that. So absolutely explored.
Yes, yeah.
In the storyboarding process, we wanted to what is Margot's story? And where we ended up with Margot is, and I love that moment where Gru sends her off. And he's like, God, I hope they love you. And then she had a bad day. And then at the end, when Poppy comes to the house, you see Margot's like, oh, I've got a friend. So, and that's kind of all we needed. And I'll tell you why we ended up not going down that road. It was hard to make it something interesting and new. We've seen Mean Girls, and it's it was going exactly where you thought it was. And so, as a result, the scenes just didn't feel interesting. We're like, okay, we get it. Poppy's mean. She's mean to Margot. And so that's why we left it on the cutting room floor, as you would say, because it just didn't. It was hard to make it a fresh idea. But usually, if you have that sense of something, I guarantee you we've tried it. Over the course of 3+ years of production, we thought about it, we've tried it, and then for a variety of reasons, I like to think for good ones, we've made the choice not to do it.
Yeah. Because it felt that way similar with the Super Minions. They definitely had their payoffs and they were hilarious and stuff like that. But I would say close to inconsequential to the
again.
It's setting.
Again,
I know,
no, 100% a choice. We had them. We had one funny version I liked where they show up. They show up and then they end up. They see what's going on with Gru and then they go have ice cream. So even more inconsequential than what we have currently. And what I like currently is, it is inconsequential, and they're not even really using their superpowers to save the day. And I'll tell you, the problem we had, when we would use them for their superpowers, again, it just felt like kind of a half-baked version of a Marvel movie. And Marvel's always going to do that better than we are. And, they do that. That's their thing. So that's again a choice. It's like you pump it up and then you sort of deflate it, and it becomes like really a button. The other part about it that's important is that we didn't want to give the heroics to the minions. We wanted to give the heroics to Gru and the baby, because the story is about them coming together, not the Mega Minions saving the day.
Yes.
So again, it's done, boarded, tried, but the reason we go the way we go is is after much consideration.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Was it much of a technical challenge in finding let's just look at the Mega Minions for a minute, to kind of balance what they're up to? I mean, they're pretty much still minions, but that really stretchy guy.
That was probably, I would say, our biggest technical challenge, because, I mean, if you notice, most of the stretching is reserved for his arms. A little bit in his head he's got. And, of course, the animation, I love it because they're all sort of bad at what they do, because he always walks who's kind of bent, you know what I mean? And we had played with other ideas, because the stretchy guy, you remember, what's her name? Elastigirl. And, of course, Mr. Fantastic. There's been other stretchy characters, but changing their shape and more broadly, there's a lot you could do. And some of those things we played with in testing, but we never actually ended up putting them in the film. Yeah. And so kind of what you see is what you get. Like, essentially with him, it's essentially his arms are what we ended up doing. There was a lot of tricky stuff in the rig to make that all work.
Yeah. Every time a Despicable Me or something comes out, people have a lot of reservations. You're just like, what more can we do?
Yeah.
But obviously it's such a rich universe.
Yeah.
And it always catches me by surprise how funny and humor is like the first gateway. And if you can get people laughing, you can get them crying. Right? And it's much harder to get people laughing.
Right.
But you guys balance that really, really well in this.
Well, thank you. I mean, I think that, look, I agree. I feel like there's always kind of a little bit knives out sometimes, because, it's got a 4 after it. But, genuinely, we're trying to do something that we hope people enjoy and laugh with us. And hopefully there's a moment, in seeing the characters together, particularly at the end, and there's something really there that, is heartwarming and fun. And there's nothing wrong with something that's just fun and entertaining, and that's really what we set out to do. It's not and I think at this moment in time, particularly for theatrical movie going, I think, let's take a victory where we get it. You know what I mean? Let's not argue with it. Yeah, I mean, that really is, and that's been, as I think I said before, I've done a few interviews. That was really something that we set out to do at the beginning, was a way to set us apart from what else was being done out there. Love other things that are being done out there, but it felt, and not even just animated. Now, it's, as I just mentioned, the third act of our film, like not trying to compete with Marvel. That's a waste of time. They're great at it. So let's do what we do. And we've been very fortunate that the audience has had a very positive reaction to what we've done. And that's so gratifying for me as a filmmaker and one of the people that helped put this world together. So, yeah, I couldn't ask for more. And that's really the spirit in which we make them. Yeah.
Thank you so much,
Thank you,
Chris.
Cole. I appreciate it very much. Truly.